Hello everybody and welcome. In today's video, we're going to be talking about player instructions in Football Manager. And let's get started with an introduction to instructions. Instructions are the specific ways you want your tactic to play out during a match. And there are two types of tactical instructions: team instructions and player instructions. Team instructions are given on the tactic page and are broad, general ways you want your team to play. And then there's player instructions. Some are given with the player role you choose. These are called hard-coded instructions and cannot be changed. There's also additional instructions you can add to the player outside of what the player role gives. And in the flowchart order, player instructions come first and then team instructions. This is the team instruction, dribble less. By selecting this team instruction, I'm telling every player in the tactic I would prefer them to pass the ball around rather than dribbling it. However, let's look at the inside forward player role. It has a hard-coded player instruction of dribble more. So this player role will look to dribble more even though we've told the team to dribble less. When dealing with instructions, whether team or player, it's important to remember that there are no absolutes in Football Manager. No instruction you give will 100% tell your player to do or not do something. They're still going to decide what to do based on their attributes. All we're changing is the tendency that we want them to play with. Since today's video is on player instructions, let's check out some of the different ways I like to use them. Player instructions are usually the last thing I implement into my tactic. I find it's easier to make these specific changes at the end, where my team is playing mostly how I want, and I'll evaluate my players and tell them to do the things they're good at more and things they're not so good at less. Let's head to River Plate and look at a 4-2-3-1. We're going to focus on the Segundo Volante role. The benefit of this role is that on support there are no hard-coded instructions, and on attack it only has one: get further forward. Roles that don't have a lot of hard-coded instructions are super beneficial for your tactic because you can customize and tailor each role specifically to the player in that position. This is our defensive midfielder Rodrigo. He's a creative player because he has great dribbling, passing, and vision, but he also has poor finishing and long shots. Among his player traits, he has one called tries long-range passes. This means we can customize the Segundo Volante role to Rodrigo. On the tactic, I've given him personalized player instructions of take more risks when passing, dribble more, and shoot less often. These are instructions that take advantage of what he's good at and tries to limit what he's not so good at. Like in this clip, my center back is on the ball, and here's Rodrigo as a Segundo Volante with those added instructions. We'll see how he uses those instructions and his player trait, tries long-range passes, to create the scoring chance. And in this clip, he'll get the ball and dribble forward, because we've told him we want him to do that more. Now, we've introduced some risk to his play, and we'll see that since he almost loses possession. But like everything in Football Manager, there's always a risk and reward. We're trying to get the most out of our player Rodrigo in the Segundo Volante role, but because we're using customized player instructions, it won't affect any other player in that role. This is Felipe, his teammate and backup. His dribbling, finishing, and long shots are low, but he can still be effective in the Segundo Volante role. In a similar way, I can tell Felipe to dribble less and shoot less often, since that's not a strength of his game. By adding in these player instructions for two separate players, I've tailored my tactic to take advantage of what they're good at without upsetting the overall balance of the tactic. And there's no hard and fast rule I use when choosing which player instructions to add, meaning I'm not looking at their dribbling attribute and saying, it's 14, now I can tell them to dribble more. You want to evaluate your players, think about how you can get the best out of them, and then add in those player instructions. This section is going to be about the subtle differences between a position you've chosen, hard-coded player instructions, and player instructions you give. Here's a generic 4-2-3-1. This left wing position is an advanced attacking role. By choosing this formation and putting a player here, I've decided that I want somebody in an attacking position. Then, when I pick a player role, I'm deciding what kind of attacking wing role I want. I shouldn't expect this left wing position to play like a defensive midfielder. The point is that the formation you choose has a big impact on how you want to play. Don't expect huge, drastic changes when adding in player instructions or even changing your player role. Let's say I choose the winger player role on support in this left position. This is a passing chart from that winger and everywhere he completed a pass. Pretty much what you would expect for a winger. Here's a clip of him. Stays out wide. He's right-footed dominant, which is why he's going to cut inside, but in general, he's staying out wide. Now, let's say I add in the player instruction of roam from position. What I'm doing is telling the winger player role to, on occasion, roam from his position and find little pockets of space. I'm not telling him to become another player role. Here's a passing chart from the winger with roam from position and everywhere he completed a pass. There's a few differences, but overall it's very similar, which is what we would expect. It's the same player, same role, with only one added instruction. Here's a clip of the winger with roam from position added. The pass will take him centrally, but afterwards he looks for a pocket in the half space to be effective rather than going back out wide. In those two examples, I gave the winger role roam from position, but that doesn't mean he's going to become another player role. If I want that wing position to play differently, I'll choose a different player role that better suits how I want them to play. Now at this point, it's time for one of my favorite sayings. A player role with a hard-coded player instruction will always behave differently than a player role given that same instruction. So let's go back to our tactic. I've now selected a trequartista, which has the hard-coded player instruction of roam from position. It's the same instruction that the winger had, but the trequartista is a different player role, so it's going to behave differently in terms of attacking wingers. Here's a passing chart. Same player, same tactic, but now he's a trequartista. This player is much more central oriented. This is our trequartista sitting much more narrow in comparison with the winger. When he gets the ball, he's going to cut inside because that's his dominant foot. But afterwards, he attacks the goal from a central position, much like an attacking midfielder. Hopefully those examples show that adding in a player instruction is a much more subtle difference compared with changing the player role itself. The last thing I want to talk about is generally I don't try to recreate another player role with player instructions. If I find myself adding in player instructions and it starts to bleed into another role, I'll just use that other role. For example, let's head to River Plate again and say I wanted to run this 4-4-1-1 with a winger on the right side. But I want the winger to close down more and tackle harder, because I want to build a high press, aggressive tactic. Well, there's a player role that already has those hard-coded instructions, the defensive winger. I think about the player role first and how they fit into my tactic, and then I adjust the player instructions from there. In that last example, instead of trying to turn the winger into a pressing role, I'll just choose the player role that's more effective at doing that. As we wrap up, if you have any questions about player roles or tactical styles, I have a bunch of different playlists on the channel that you can check out to hopefully answer some questions. And I also have a Patreon account if you'd like to support the channel. Anyway, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.